The dementia support group, I've been going to that for a few years. That's very good. You get to discuss things with other carers, and you get to pick up little hints, things that you may be not doing quite easily for yourself and for your loved one. When I first went, I thought, I'm not going back again because I heard too much. I didn't want to know about what was ahead of me. So in the end I had to go back because I thought, well, I might learn something good. One of the things that I also found is that me sharing what happened to me and what happens with my darling husband, that I'm able to help them. And that was something I wasn't expecting.
I used to, when I could, make an appointment to go and see the doctor in Mandurah that was looking after Dad and Mum. So I was very aware of Dad's condition. And at one point I thought Mum had dementia as well, but the doctor explained to me that she didn't have dementia. She was just almost in a state of shock because she didn't know what to do anymore.
I would definitely start talking about driving very early on. Little conversations frequently rather than one big long conversation, but just being aware that driving is a very complex task and that is something that we're going to need to look at and evaluate when they come in for their visits.
It was very difficult for my mum because her licence was her independence and she didn't want to give it up. She was very concerned about her doctor wanting her to have extra tests in order to get her driver's licence.
As soon as someone is diagnosed with dementia, they're actually meant to be informing the licensing authority that they have dementia. There are some guidelines that I use as well, and I sometimes bring those out with patients so that I'm saying this isn't just me choosing to be mean. It is not necessary to have their licence taken straight away. That's not a requirement. What is a requirement is that they have a medical assessment to check that they're actually safe to keep driving. So early on in dementia, someone may well have no impairment of vision, no impairment of their hearing, no impairment of their judgment or their decision making, not yet be impaired enough with complex tasks for it to affect their driving. They may be very safe in their body movements. They're not likely to hit the accelerator instead of the brake, and they're also not going to be too distracted.
We eventually got notices through the mail that she'd gone through a red light and, I raised it with her and she said, oh no, I didn't do that. But she started thinking, well, maybe this is starting to happen. And she had a couple of close brushes where she almost had accidents. And little things happened like she'd hop in the car and she'd forget how to control some of the instruments in the car. And she just realised at that point that she'd have to give up her licence. It became scary for her to drive.
So the questions that we would be asking the individual with dementia and later on in their dementia process, their caregivers or others around them would be, number one, do they feel they're safe driving? Because quite often a patient will have insight and be able to make the judgment call that they think it's time for them to give up driving. So the question is there any deterioration in hearing? Is there any deterioration in their vision? Have you noticed them getting agitated by multiple tasks or multiple conversations going on at once? So are they more easily distracted? Have you noticed concentration fading? So certainly by the time someone is falling asleep or regularly losing train of thought in a conversation, they shouldn't be driving because their concentration span isn't good enough. The other questions that we ask, have you ever been driving and suddenly not been aware of where you are? So that ability to navigate and follow a path is part of driving, and so if that's happening, that's of concern. The other questions that we ask, have you noticed or have family members noticed unusual dents, bumps or scratches on the car? Because that can be a clue that there are some factors affecting the driving, affecting spatial awareness and affecting judgment.
So there is a scheme, like in the ACT, for instance, there's a disabled taxi scheme, which gives you, according to your capacity to pay, access to subsidised taxi services and disabled taxi services as well.
Now, I thought I'd write a journal, but I found it was just too painful, sitting there writing about this thing that I hated. So for some reason or other, it started flowing out of my head in verse, so I wrote it down. And I could cope with it better. I shake my head, wondering how it came to this, thinking about the lover and the long-forgotten kiss. I've now become his carer, not just his wife, and that's just one of the changes in our life. These days, his face hardly ever wears a smile, and he hasn't seemed happy for the longest while. I feel quite nervous about the years ahead. To think about it just fills me with dread. So I pick up my courage and heave a sigh and face what lies ahead with the long goodbye. I learned a lot of tools from the Dementia Advisor to help me cope with the little things that were a bit tricky. One of them, she said, gave me was a licence to deceive. She said, I award you with this. And it's a licence to tell a white lie. And it has caused, let's put it this way, it's been the saviour of a lot of problems that I could have caused by saying the wrong thing to him. And if I took him into respite like I used to do and leave him there for 3 weeks, I had to tell him after I'd take him in, I'm just going to the toilet. I'll be back in a minute. I'd get in the car and go home. If I told him, which I'd made that mistake, that I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time, he got so upset at the time I did that he didn't want me as a wife anymore. He was going to find a brand new wife in this nursing home and not for me not to come back. So I learnt the hard way.